Hey everybody, this is the Alex Manassa, here to tell you what's on my mind and think out loud so you can see what's inside the brain of an engineer. So I've seen a lot of ramblings back and forth on the Twitter sphere, as usual, that's what the Twitter sphere is for, about what kind of education is the right one. I see a lot of really great arguments come from Jeremy Wayne Tate about a classical education, and I agree with that, and I want to add to it. I agree with it mostly, kind of, sort of. I might disagree a little bit. All right, I'm trying to disagree politely. Okay, if you were to learn one thing that really makes you intelligent, makes you an intellectual, makes you a force to be reckoned with, the critical thinking thing that no one can really seem to define properly but everybody wants, which is pretty much what happiness is, I would say argument. And here's a reason why I kind of agree with Jeremy Wayne Tate and everyone who's for classical education, while at the same time disagreeing, right? Because all of the classics were derived from extensive argumentation, extensive debate, like major trash talk, right? Major trash talk. Like the schools of thought of Stoicism and Romanticism, I think Romanticism was started in ancient Greece, are talked about quite a bit, but what about cynicism, right? What about Diogenes, right? What about people who are just like the George Carlins of their time, who were just smack-talking these rich Greek landowners who were trying to raise their sons to be bigger and richer, Greeker landowners, right? The ability to argue is what classical education is, right? The ability to argue and the ability to creatively imagine. If you took those two things, creativity and the ability to argue, you have the classics. You have all of the different stories that come through. You get arguments about what is good, what is a hero, what is a good state, that sort of thing. Those are the classics. So I think if you are gonna tell me that, you're gonna use the classics to prepare a student, yes, that is true. But you better be teaching them how to argue properly. If the student doesn't know how to argue properly, even from let's talk about like the practical stuff, arguing for a salary, having a good debate with people that you know and love about like what to have for dinner that night, having a discussion about where to live, like where to choose a house. Now that's a big argument ready to happen. What about how to spend money and money habits, right? How do you have a discussion with your mom and dad about what career you want to go into and what your college degree is going to be in, right? How are you going to have an argument with the professor to get the information out? How are you going to have an argument with your friends about what news is real and what's reputable and what things do you know? Because if you just take information, you dump into someone's brain, they are useless. It is mush because the information is conflicting and often has to be parsed with a value system, a morality system, right? Raw data doesn't give you any sort of moral a judgment on what to do, and we choose what to do based on moral judgments, right? So how do you determine what is moral? You have to argue. It's entirely subjective. There's no scientific argument about morality. You can start to say, oh, this one's going to save the most lives, this method's going to maximize happiness. But the fact is, how do you even know that saving lives or happiness is actually the end goal? Now, that may seem kind of crazy, but if I said, hey, let's make everybody happy, then wouldn't I just distribute, drugs to everyone? That makes them happy. But that doesn't seem like the right thing to do, right? Because it starts to reduce free agency. They become just addicted to drugs, and they're, happy all the time, regardless of what they're putting into their lives. They're not improving, but they're happy. Well, that means you value hard work and you value rugged individualism. So you get all these different schools of thought, and each of these schools of thought is arguing for their own moral truth. And you have to sort of pick them, in my opinion, pick them up like they're tools. I'm going to use a little bit of cynicism there, a little bit of stoicism here. I'm going to use a little bit of other philosophies where I need them, right? And I have to go through arguments to figure that out. And humans, to an extent, are a hive mind in that we do talk to each other. We're not hive mind as in we're all locked together, but I need the hive, the collective consciousness of other people, to sort out what's going on in my own consciousness. Because if I want to figure out what's good, what's important, that means I need to make a value judgment, and I need to start comparing it. So I compare it to other people's value systems. The morality that you woke up with one day to say, oh, this is good and this is bad, you didn't come up with that. You did not come up with that. That came from thousands of years of people making judgments, little judgments here and there, little moralistic calls. and we saw which ones survived and which ones didn't. We saw which one made it out and which one didn't, and we built that in to our moral code today. Like we didn't just wake up and become moral beings like we are now. That's why it annoys me to no end that we use 2020 morality, our own value system of 2020 on people from even 100 or 50 years ago, right? And we're definitely not the pinnacle of moral virtue in our society today at all. Not at all. In fact, some of the areas, especially like California, I'm going to use California and specifically like San Francisco as an example because they seem to think that they're like the ultimate moral arbiters of what everyone else in the country should do. And they're also the place that has like the highest poverty and the highest divide between rich and poor, and just everything that's just terrible things all over the place for it. It's super expensive. It's restrictive in terms of freedoms. Opening a business is next to impossible there. The crime is now going up substantially. People are fleeing. It's like fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So in 2020, we don't have any room to talk about who's moral 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or even 10 years ago. I just don't see it. As an engineer, I make my calls based on results, right? So if believing in some sort of magical purple monkey in the sky got me really good results, I'd be like, I got to seriously consider this purple monkey theory. Obviously that doesn't work, so I don't, right? We all make our own beliefs and moral systems, and we make it based on the works of other people and the things that we've learned throughout the time. So if you want to talk about the classics, which do delve into what is good, what is moral, it does delve into stories of what is a hero, what is it to be a good person, then that's great. But that didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't just come up with that out of their head. A bunch of philosophers and storytellers over hundreds or thousands of years in ancient Greece argued back and forth and told stories and counter stories, and we only see the end result come out of that. And we only see a portion of the end result that came out of that. The reality is that we didn't see all the arguing because most of that was verbal. Like all the written arguments, those I don't think people wrote down the arguments. People just took notes on what Socrates said and what Plato said, right? There's even an argument on whether or not the written word is valid, right? It's like the tablet computers and the internet of its day. It's like, oh, kids these days are not they're not memorizing things anymore. They're writing stuff down on parchment so they can read it back later. It's like they just don't know anything anymore. That was a real argument that was happening back then, right? That's an argument. We argue. I love Diogenes because he's such a smack talker. That was a guy that lived as a minimalist. He lived in a big clay pot and just talked smack about how everybody else lived. It was pretty incredible. But he would go through and have he would have call out sessions, I guess. I think it was Plato. Plato said something that we think is stupid now, but back then they're just trying to get biology. They don't have biology, right? So again, standards of today and yesteryear. He said that a human is like a chicken, is basically a chicken that has no feathers on it, right? So Diogenes went out and just he heard that and it was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I'm going to go and do some smack talking. He just got a chicken, plucked all the feathers off, which is pretty cruel by today's standards, and showed up and said, "Behold, a man." And and all the students were laughing their butts off, as students would do, and the teacher was discredited. But that's exactly what you should be doing. I should be arguing constantly, and that's the reason why I think this is important, is because this is how engineers make decisions. Is we're arguing constantly, and we're not really known for being very classical, but we're using the classical methods, I think. We're trying to argue what's good, what is priority in this project, what does the customer really want, what is the customer really paying for, what is good for our company, right? What is going to maximize value and increase efficiency. And we start having all these arguments and discussions. It's not that different from the moral discussions. A lot of it is value judgment. A lot of it is in your mind what starts to make sense to you given all the imperfect information and incomplete information that you have, right? So that's my thoughts. Arguing, that's the best classical, that's the best education, is knowing how to argue. You can parse out whether or not something is good or bad if you can argue effectively. And arguing effectively means that is not about winning. It actually has nothing to do with whether or not you win the argument. It's about how do you extract as much value from the argument as possible. I will purposefully have arguments where I know that I'm wrong because I want someone to tell me their perspective on what's right. And sometimes the best way to do that is to take an opposing stance. It's called Catholics call it the devil's advocate for when they're choosing a pope, right? You need to advocate for the opposition if you want to hear a firm position, right? You might find out that you're actually all wrong. Now that's painful, but that's learning, right? Learning can be painful. All right, guys. That's good for today. I'll see you guys later. This has been the Alex Manassa, and I look forward to seeing you on my next Thinking Out Loud. All right, peace.